Hello, and I'd like to welcome you to Accounting 6302. I'm sorry that this is getting out a little bit late. We had quite a crazy week as we had some candidates in this week, and it's rather time consuming to deal with those, but we should be okay for the rest of the semester. And so this will be the first video I will produce. I hope to get the first three chapters of your list done this weekend, and then on Tuesday, we will be meeting by teams, which I'll send out the invitation Monday for that. Anyway, um, Accounting 6302 is managerial accounting. There's some cost accounting components involved in it, but the back two modules are very much about um, evaluation of the metrics that we're going to do. So we'll be learning the accounting part in the first part, and the evaluation of management, both middle management in module three, and upper management in module four. Now, this book, the book that you're using, very much has more of a strategic component than most cost accounting books. In fact, the first chapter we're dealing with, chapter two, is on implementing strategy. And so there won't be a whole lot of problems in this one. Most of the time when I do these videos, it'll be mostly problems, but this chapter doesn't lend itself to problems so much. Um, and so it's much more conceptual um, along those lines. And so let's get to it. This video probably shouldn't be too terribly long. Um, and when we talk about strategy, of course, we're talking about, what there often gets to be a question about what differentiates strategy from tactics. And my simple take on things, and it's important to be able to put things in words that make sense to you. Um, when you're thinking about these things, so it's kind of a shorthand to yourself. And to me, the idea of strategy is what business are we going to be in, versus tactics, which is how are we going to operate, how are we going to do our business. And so that's kind of a very non-granular distinction, but I think if you think about things in those terms, it will tend to serve you well. Now, lots of times, what appears to be the obvious answer is not necessarily the actual answer. For example, we all are familiar with McDonald's. I think something like 90% of Americans live within 5 minutes of a McDonald's store. Um, and we think about that McDonald's being in the fast food industry, and they are, but that's not their key success factor. Their key success factor is real estate. McDonald's spends more than any other business in the fast food industry uh, taking traffic counts and looking at traffic patterns and all that sort of thing. And you'll notice, if you notice, particularly in an area that's growing, a McDonald's will go in, and then shortly thereafter, some companies will piggyback off of that and have. But usually, if you look at it, McDonald's has the best real estate of those different factors. Walmart, obviously, is a low price provider of numerous goods and groceries, that sort of thing. But their key success factor is their information technology. They, if you drive by a warehouse, a Walmart warehouse, we have one in Plainview. If you drive up Interstate 27, if you're around here, drive up Interstate 27 north of Lubbock, go through Plainview. You'll see trucks lined up getting to the Walmart warehouse. Well, the trick with Walmart is that very few goods actually stay in their warehouse. The supply trucks pull in on one side of the warehouse. It's called cross docking, and the supply trucks pull up at one end of the or one side of the warehouse. It's a long thing, and then you have the distribution trucks on the other side of the warehouse, And instead of unloading the pallets, having it sit there, they just unload the pallets off one truck and put it onto the 10 or 20 trucks on the other side of things. And that's only possible through careful management of their information technology. That way, they don't have a lot of inventory sitting in warehouses. Most of their inventory is actually sitting in stores or is on the road to be delivered to stores. There's very little that actually sits in the warehouse, and that keeping their inventory down allows them to keep their prices lower, which is the business where they're in. So we're going to look at a number of different things. Obviously, in your if you're an MBA student, we have both MBA and MPA students in this class. If you're an MBA student, you'll be taking a strategy course, Management 6366. Obviously, one chapter is not going to supplant a whole course on something, and but this is just to give you, this chapter is just to give you a working knowledge of various strategy components so that we can look at the managerial accounting and the evaluations of management as we go through the course. All right, so the first thing that they talk about in your book is a very common one. It's called SWOT analysis. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I'm going to turn the camera down now so that we can look at some look at some pages out of your textbook. And strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats is one very common way of looking at strategy. Obviously, what strengths does an organization have? What weaknesses does an organization have? And this is going to obviously be different for each organization. And then you're going to measure what opportunities you have and what threats you have. And in just a little bit, I'm going to introduce you to Porter's Five Forces, which kind of expands on the SWOT analysis. But SWOT's been with us for a long time. It was there, back in the dark ages when I was taking business classes. So it's something that's been with us a long time, very common, and it's very useful to look at. Some of the things that we talk about there would be management. Is that a plus or a minus for us? Different product lines. What kind of barriers to entry do we have? What kind of research and development? There's very much a first mover advantage that if you're the first one to market doing things, you have to do that. Now, one of the things I would tell you is you have to look at the nature of the industry you're in. For example, if you are in an industry where the marginal cost being the cost to produce one more unit is significant, and that would be anything from bricks for houses, cinder blocks, all the way to laptop computers and many other things, where the marginal cost is very high. What you're going to see is there can be a lot of different competitors in the marketplace. But where you have marginal costs that are very low, and most notably are things like software and cell phone apps and that sort of thing, it often becomes a winner take most, if not all. And so the strategies that you adopt become very different. With a marketplace that allows a number of competitors, then you want to focus on making a profit very early in the process. On the other hand, if it's a winner take all or winner take most, your most important metric is probably market share. We saw this with Adobe. Adobe Acrobat, the PDF format became the dominant structure. There were, back when this was coming out, 20 years ago, there were lots of competitors to the document market that you couldn't change readily, or you have to have special software to change, can lock up. Adobe gave away their reader for free, right? And they did that so that people would adopt the Adobe thing. Of course, the Adobe Acrobat allows you to modify PDF documents. The Adobe Reader, you can't modify a document, but you can read any document that's in that PDF format. They're now competing PDF readers, but at first they didn't. And so Adobe became the dominant. Same thing is true with Windows. If you run an IBM-based computer system, Windows is the dominant force. At one time, there were several different. As recently as 10, 15 years ago, a lot of people talked about Linux as a free operating system, but almost everybody has now gone to Microsoft Windows and that sort of thing. Of course, if you're an Apple-based iOS product, and I use Apple at my house, then you have iOS as your operating system. So those are just different ways, of adopting things. So you have that. So your book talks about critical success factors, and from critical success factors, which can also be called your value proposition. What makes your company worthwhile? What makes it special? Why should customers do business with you? And so we can talk about critical success factors, which leads to key performance indicators, KPIs, or key success indicators, those sort of things. We don't have to measure everything to know if we're on track. We only need to measure the things that are important to consumers, for example, and this. So in your book on page 44, Exhibit 2-1 lists a number of critical success factors, and it's divided out into financial factors, customer factors, internal processes, learning, and growth. As we'll see in just a minute, that very much mirrors the balanced scorecard approach to things, and how we get these critical success factors. So, for example, McDonald's, go back to McDonald's. McDonald's critical success factor is not making the best hamburger in the world. I think most people agree that McDonald's hamburgers are fairly consistent. You can go to Odessa, Texas, or you can go to Washington, D.C., get a McDonald's hamburger, and it pretty much tastes the same. So they do have the value of consistency, but very few people say, wow, that's the best hamburger I ever ate. So being the best is not their critical success factor. On the other hand, there's a place in Washington, D.C. that I dined at a couple years ago now, called Capitol Grill. It's not the same one that we have as a chain down in Houston and stuff like that, but it's called Capitol Grill. And they literally made great hamburgers. They were known for their hamburgers, and it was a tablecloth type setup, restaurant, and their hamburgers were, at that time, a couple of years ago, were on the order of about $12, $14 a piece, and they were great hamburgers. They weren't looking for mass market; they were looking for quality in that realm. We see that in a number of things. Some people buy gas wherever it's cheapest and don't really care about the brand name product. Some people buy gas where it's most convenient. Again, so on that sort of thing. On the other hand, you may be very picky if you drive a high-end automobile and only put premium gas in it, and you only want the ones with the additives that keep your engines clean and that sort of thing. So different markets appeal to different consumers, and it's probably a mistake to try to appeal to too big, too wide of a swath. We see that in the uh, automobile rental space. Thrifty and Advantage merged, and one was considered a premier, and one was considered a value, or a price competitor. And customers were just confused, and they haven't done very well since that merger. Um, and so it makes it very difficult if you're trying to be everything to everybody. Back when I was a college student, the big thing for us was having a really nice stereo. Of course, you can get a much better stereo than we could get in that day for much less price today because of the digital era. But this is back in the day of vacuum tubes and all that kind of stuff. And a stereo, a great stereo may cost you up to $2,000-3,000. That's not adjusted for inflation. And so in the company Panasonic, which you all may know, wanted to get into that high-end stereo business, but they had to actually change their name to Technics for a while. It's now switched back to Panasonic as they've improved their image, but they marketed under the brand Technics for a while. And you may know the firm LG makes TVs and other electronic components. That name change was strictly to improve their image. It stands for Lucky Gold Star, a Korean company that was in the low end of electronic products for so long. But when they wanted to improve their image, they had to change their name. So these things all occur with that. Then the next area that they talk about is competitive strategy, which we just kind of talked about. And the two they talk about in your book are cost leadership and differentiation. Now, there are a number of ways to differentiate. You can differentiate on quality. A Timex watch and a Rolex watch both keep time. They both do a good job of it, but one is really more of a status symbol and a piece of jewelry, while the other is a watch, which has come out of are not as popular. Watches themselves are not as popular, which we'll talk about in just a minute when we talk about Porter's Five Forces. And then value chain analysis is very important. In the value chain, we talk about the steps in the value chain are designs, materials acquisition, assembly, intermediate assembly, warehousing, retail sales, and customer service. Now, a company will never have all of the value chain, but you can have more or less of the value chain as you see fit. Again, like Walmart and Sam's Club, their subsidiary, they started off just selling other people's products, and now it's hard to find products that aren't labeled Members Mark, which are often contracted for them and their label, and that way they get to save some or keep more of the profit on that sort of thing. They are the warehouse. Sam's is the warehouse, and so they either sell to a retail store or to a customer, and so they've taken out much of the or they've overtaken much of their own distribution network in that. They've eliminated the retail sales component on the value chain. You're always going to have something on the other end on the product side because you have to get raw materials from somewhere or an idea if you're a service company from somewhere. And so that's an important one, and that's an exhibit 2-3 in your book. You see it there, and um, I won't spend all the time reading it to you, but you can. Those are some things that you'll want to know, and that sort of thing. And then they give an example in your book on computer manufacturing and the decision process of the value chain in computer manufacturing. The next one that we have is the balanced scorecard. And the balanced scorecard was created by two people, or I say created, but I would say it was really more compiled by two people. And it's always a heavy component in any accounting book that gets into this, because Kaplan and Norton, who created the balanced scorecard, are accountants themselves. So, accountants like to support their own, like any group. But the balanced scorecard does provide a number of benefits. One of the criticisms of business is the focus is too much on the bottom line, and they don't take care of the long term by not focusing on the other. And that actually came out of the 1970s, Milton Friedman, that sort of thing, that the purpose of business is to enhance shareholder value. That's not as narrow-minded as it may seem at first glance, because if you don't take care of customers, they'll buy from a competitor. And if you don't take care of workers, they'll leave and go somewhere else, and you won't have the quality of workmanship that you desire. And if you don't take care of the environment or the community, you're going to get a bad reputation, and that's going to hurt sales. And so, focusing on the bottom line, the idea for those proponents of people who say that we should focus on the bottom line, which is not necessarily it's not my position, although I think the bottom line is important. But when you look at it from that standpoint, it does encompass everything to get to that bottom line. Now, the problem that we have, which we'll get into in some later chapters, is I will show you how I can do some things to, so to speak, goose the bottom line that are not necessarily good for the company, but are perfectly legal accounting maneuvers. There's absolutely nothing wrong from a legal standpoint. It may not be the best thing for shareholders. It may not be the best thing for management. But if you design, and this is where we get into it later in these, if you design reward systems that reward short-term performance, you're going to get short-term outcomes. The balanced scorecard is supposed to, in this case, overcome that short-term limitation, because we look at four perspectives. We look at, first, the financial perspective. So that would include the bottom line, or if you're in one of those cases where you're an early stage company and you're trying to get market share, we might look at market share as a financial component. Those sorts of things going on. So we can design that. We can look at top line revenues. We can look at bottom line income. We can design it so we want, but in a balanced scorecard, we're always going to have a financial component. The second component that we are going to have in a balanced scorecard is the customer component. And there are a number of ways to measure customer component. It could be by return customers. It could be by customer satisfaction surveys. It could be by the number of complaints that we receive. There's all sorts of different, that would be like a negative indicator. but there's all sorts of different ways that we can measure our customer utility or customer satisfaction on that. The third one that we have um, is going to be the internal business processes. So this would be things like inventory. If we wanted to adopt a lean manufacturing system, we would look at inventories. We would look at throughput. We would look at time from order to delivery on those sorts of things. We would look at the amount of scrap and rework when we're doing a number of things. So this is how many processes. So if we have three different product lines, how many of those lines can be produced on the same assembly line because they use common components? That cuts down, that increases our repetition, that cuts down on our mistakes generally when we do that. And then we have learning and growth as our final component. So learning and growth encompasses both the individual workers. Um, how do we cross train people? Do we promote people? Do we train them for bigger, better jobs? That, of course, allows them a path towards their personal economic development. Do we learn how to do things better? Various things. There is a book, and it's not required reading for this course, but it's called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. Senge, can't see his name here, but Peter Senge I don't know if he's still there or not, an MIT professor. And the fifth discipline was called talking about the learning organization. And we have to learn both from our mistakes and from our opportunities and other people's things, like benchmarking other organizations and that kind of things, learning how to do better. You see, in the tech industries today, one of the ways they perform learning and growth is that they allow uh, an organization to develop something that is positive and has a lot of consumer appeal, and then they just buy it, and then it applies across. So we see Google does that, Facebook did that with Instagram, Google has done that with YouTube. um, a number of different ways to do that sort of thing. But this is a book I would encourage you, and it's a little bit of an older book now, so you'd be able to pick up a copy really cheap. Um, but I would encourage, if you're going to be in the management area, particularly if you're not in the service management area, if you're manufacturing or tech or some type of org, that you pick up a copy of this and read through it. Obviously, it's getting a little bit dated now, but it's still an excellent book as far as things go. But learning and growth is an important one, and if we cover all four of these areas, that keeps us on path to be. The term that has come out is sustainable. Um, Now, on this balanced scorecard, I will tell you that a lot of organizations add two areas to the balanced score. And by the way, one of the things when we talk about in the back modules, the last two modules, is to develop reward systems for management, both middle management and upper management, reward systems that encompass all of these areas so that they don't just focus on one area to the exclusion of others. But two other areas that are popular that companies can add on is an environmental, and then a sustainability. And obviously, environmental sustainability, there's a lot of overlap there, but sustainability also means can the organization continue as well? So there's actually a sustain the organization component in that. We often today combine these into what's known as ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Um, One of the big pushes that have come, actually, Bill Clinton, when he was president, labeled it uh, business government partnership. But the organization where you have this mix of both business and government, that's become a larger and larger component. We now have a lot of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that are helping to dictate policy, that sort of thing. The World Economic Forum just concluded this weekend, and of course, they put out a lot of things. Again, certainly not advocating for them, but they certainly get a lot of traction um, in the business and governmental communities for that. Um, okay, let's see. Okay, the next one, oh, in Exhibit 2-5 in your book, you see the various things that can fall under the balanced scorecard for an electronic company. We usually, um, we might have multiples in an area, but when we have a whole chapter on the balanced scorecard, and we'll talk about that as both leading, lagging, and coincident indicators. Um, for example, if we go down here um, to research and development, that's going to be a leading indicator. Obviously, if we're starting a new product, that's going to happen over time. Um, on the other hand, um, things like the financial perspective, profitability is a lagging indicator. It's what's happened in the past. And then you have coincident indicators such as delivery, number of on time deliveries, shipments, that sort of thing. So those all go into the various balanced scorecard. All right, one of the ones that is fairly new, this was not in business school when I was a student. And believe me, there's a lot that's been in business school now that wasn't there when I was a student. Um, but is the strategy map. So the strategy map is Exhibit 2.6 and 2.7 in your book. And you see it, again, it's broken down like the balanced scorecard here, the way your authors have presented it. And it puts various things that, what's dependent on what. And it starts kind of from a bottom up approach. And so we do various things and what's important in order to get to the ownership, equity, return on investment, revenue growth, that sort of thing that accountants tend to focus on most of the time. And then Exhibit 2.7 has a number of different goals and techniques. And then you also see it has a balanced scorecard measure on the strategy maps for that sort of thing. The last one that I'm going to present is not in your book, and that is Porter's 5 forces. Okay, now Michael Porter is a professor of marketing at Harvard, but even though he's in marketing, and we generally think of strategy as um, a management perspective, marketing gets very heavily into the strategy Let me see if I can get this a little higher so we can get it all in here. There we go. And you'll see that the five forces will start in the center with the competitive rivalry. So these are things that are known, and these are this is the things where, like when we're talking about the SWOT analysis, we're talking very much about the threats out there and possibly the weaknesses in a company on this competitive rivalry. Um, the if you have high switching costs and low switching costs for those of you who are Apple fans, like I have an Apple phone, I have a MacBook Air at home that I use, an iPad. For those of you who are in the Apple ecosystem, there is a huge um, switching cost if you were to switch to an Android phone and an IBM based computer. Now, I use an IBM computer at work, so it wouldn't be quite as bad for me as a lot of people that have all their stuff on Apple. But if you have low switching costs, it would take nothing for me to switch from a Dell computer at work to an HP computer or another brand of IBM computer. That would be a very low switching cost. One of the problems that you have if you are in the value proposition of the low cost provider is that you have very low customer loyalty, and so that's an issue that you might have on that. Also, you can think of new entry. Who could possibly come into that? And one of the things that we see is that, like in the cell phone community, Samsung has a bunch of patents and Apple has a bunch of patents, and they do what they call ring fence, though, so that it makes it very difficult for competitors to come in without licensing some of their technology. So and companies prevent new technology. Lots of times they prevent it by patents. Apple just lost a patent suit, or is in the process of appealing it, but is losing a patent suit on their Apple Watch over the blood oxygen sensor. And so they're going to have to find another way to offer that particular feature in an Apple Watch if they're going to continue to do it, or they're going to have to pay the owner of that patent for it. So another way that they can do it is another way to erect barriers to entry is through legislation. It's hard to start a bank. You have to have a minimum capital requirement in order to start a bank, and you have to be approved. In Las Vegas, if you want to start a casino, you have to prove that you don't have any mob ties, and you have to have minimum capitalization and pass background checks. And so we create barriers to entry. In my profession, the accounting profession, you cannot do an audit unless you are a CPA. You can do the audit, but you can't sign the audit papers as this is a legitimate audit. So that's a barrier to entry. So you have to go to school for 4 years or 5 years now. Have 150 hours. You have to pass an exam. You have to pay. In Texas, you have to pay two fees: a personal CPA license fee and a firm license fee, in order to perform an audit in the state of Texas. So these are all different scale barriers to entry. Now, those are pretty low barriers, but we do that. The medical profession, you can't do medicine without passing the medical license. Well, in order to pass your medical license, you have to go to an approved medical school. You can't just read for it. Same with law, except in California, you have to to go to an approved law school in order to become a lawyer. These are all barriers to entry, legislative type barriers of entry that we go to. Economies of scale, this is the one where things get bigger. One of the things that we now know from economics is that when organizations get to some size, there becomes a size where they start to lose their internal costing mechanism and there actually become diseconomies of scale. And we found that in the banking industry. It costs Citibank and Chase and Wells Fargo more to perform some functions than it costs some local regional banks to do some things. And that's because they have this economies of scale. But most of the time, we think of bigger as providing economies of scale, those sorts of things. So, depending on, that can be the threat of new entry. The thing that we don't usually see in a typical SWOT analysis, or two of the things we don't usually see, is the supplier power and the buyer power. I can tell you it is very dangerous to have just one or two buyers that constitutes 100% of your business because you're beholden to them. And you might hear people complain about buying for either selling to Sam's or Walmart. They said that Walmart will get a contract with a company, and then 2 years later, when it's up for renewal, Sam's or Walmart will come in there and say, "Hey, you've got to lower your price by 10%, or we won't be able to do business with you." This is nothing new. When Sears and Roebuck was the major retailer in the United States, they had their own product line, Kenmore. Of course, Sears is hardly existent anymore, but they had their own product line, Kenmore, which was produced in the most part by Whirlpool for appliances. And they did that. They did that, and eventually Whirlpool said, we can't compete. You're just going to have to go somewhere else. We're losing money. And that created a problem. Kenmore had very good brands at that time. But so this is nothing new. It's gone on forever. That sort of thing. And then supplier power. On the other hand, if there's only one person that provides it, that's one of the reasons that organizations try to limit the entrance to a field. So how much power does a supplier have? Well, going back to the Apple example, if Apple decides to raise their iPhone price by $200, I'm probably going to pay it. I might keep it an extra year or something like that, but I'm probably going to pay it because it's going to be so hard to change everything from what I have to an Android system. And so they have a lot of power in that respect. So what is supplier power? And then one that are not talked about, but should be, particularly in the world we live in, where things are changing technologically so rapidly, is the threat of substitution. For those of you who might be a little more experienced out there, you may remember the days of floppy disks. Well, I remember when they were 10.5-inch floppy disks, and then they cut that down a quarter size, and they were 5.25-inch floppy disks, and then we went to 3.5-inch floppy disks. And every time it went down in size, it was holding more and more information. Well, the threat to the floppy disk wasn't from getting floppy disks even smaller. Or other floppy disk companies. The threat to floppy disk came in thumb drives, right? We were able to do that sort of thing, and those things hold much. And the same with hard drives. My Mac Air has solid state memory now. There is no hard drive in it. So, at one time that was the one of the leading components of a of a computer system was the hard drives. Um, so it was a complete substitution, um, of that sort of thing. We see that in a lot of cases. Um, we see that in the beverage industry. A lot of people, it's not new soft drink entries that are harming Coke and Pepsi's product line. It's that people are switching to these energy drinks and various things, and waters and boba teas and all this sort of thing. It's a product that satisfies that same need, but isn't exactly in the same classification. So we see threats of substitution. And that's the one that blindsides a lot of companies. I can see very well an argument in my profession of education of somebody coming along. We've already had a couple of forays in these, what they call MOOCs, massive online, um, or maybe it's MOOC, can't remember, but and YouTube videos and that we're seeing part of that. It's still education, but you're in an online program, whereas 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it was all face to face teaching and that sort of thing. So threats of substitution can come into play. In the I'm an accountant as well as an educator, and in the accounting profession, um, we're 10 years from now, what I'm training accounting students to do today will not be what they're doing 10 years from now. I do have to train them for what their first job when they get out of here a year from two or now, but everything will be even more digital and more online, and we'll have more, particularly in the audit profession, is going to have more of an MIS flair and less of an audit transaction. It'll be audit systems, to make sure that they operate properly, and looking at code and that sort of thing, and doing dry runs to make sure answers come out. We do some of that now, but it will be even more so in the future. But so this is Porter's five forces. If I were you, I would at least know the titles of each of these: the competitive rivalry, threat of new entry, supplier power, buyer power, and threat of substitution. All right, so that's all I've got for chapter 2. Again, it's a very conceptual chapter, and I wish you well in your studies, and we will talk to you later.